Sarai, her name's later came changed to Sarah, in Genesis chapter 16. Now Sarai, Abram, and both of them got a name change later to Sarah and Abraham. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. Where do you think she found this Hagar? In Egypt, where they never should have gone. God told them to go to the promised land. They went and kept right on going down to Egypt. Sometimes we get right smack in the middle of God's will and then go right on through and move on to something else. And you end up with something you shouldn't have, and they ended up with Hagar. Had they just simply obeyed God and stayed where God put them, they would not have gone to Egypt, and they would not have gotten Hagar, and gas would not be $2.50 a gallon right now. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, this all started right here. Anyway. And Sarai said to Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. Now this may sound strange to us, but in their custom, in their country, that was standard. You know, you can't have children. Your servant girl gets pregnant, has a baby for you, and it becomes your child. That's just the way they think. Okay, it's the way they did it over there. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai, and Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. Now God had promised them children like the stars and like the sand. He waited 10 years, still no kids. Got impatient. We all do that. God promises something and just get a little impatient and jump right out of God's will because of our impatience. Just hang on, relax, okay? So he waited 10 years, and she could not have children anymore. Sarai said, Honey, I can't have kids. Where I'm done. Menopause. Go marry my servant girl. Oh, okay. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Isn't it something how our attitude changes? Some things happen, and it changes our whole attitude. This servant girl was probably a normal, sweet-tempered servant girl until she realized, I'm carrying Abram's child. Ha ha. And she despised her own mistress that she had worked for 10 years. People's attitude can change. It's incredible. Flip a switch and all of a sudden, whoa, what happened here? Who is this new person? I've never seen you before. That's what happened. Her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarai said to Abram, My wrong be upon thee. I've given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. She said, Abram, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done this. Too late. She's going to have a baby now. Now, this attitude adjustment you can see a dozen places in the Bible. It happened with Michal, Saul's daughter. If you read 1 Samuel chapter 18, Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. And they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. And then a couple verses later, Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Now Saul was going to use his daughter to try to get David killed, because he was jealous of David, because David killed Goliath, and Saul was afraid to go fight the guy. So Saul thought, well, David's a poor man. He can't give me any money, a dowry for my daughter. I'll ask him to kill 100 Philistines. Then maybe one of them will kill him. So David did. He killed 200 of them. And so Michal ended up marrying David. Now, keep in mind, twice it says Michal loved David. She even rescued him one time when Saul sent men to kill him in bed. She let him down the wall through a window, and he fled and escaped. Then, while he was escaped, Saul, her dad, took her and gave her to somebody else to be wife, because David ran off for his life. And Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Phalti, the son of somebody else. Okay. Now later, in 2 Samuel, David was king now. And he wanted to make a deal with somebody over something, and he said, okay, I'll make the deal, I'll make a league, but I got a requirement. I want my wife back. Michal was my first wife, my first love. I want her back. And so he said, don't come unless you bring Michal with you. So they brought Michal back, and the Phalti got all upset about it, and they said, go home, bud. And so he turned around and went home. You can read the whole story for yourself. But then, a couple chapters later, Michal is now wife number 7, I think. She was David's first love, wife number 1, but now she's wife number 7, and something changed in her attitude. Now, she was the daughter of Saul, and I guess we could assume that she picked up some of her dad's attitude. Saul was a great guy. He was head and shoulders taller than everybody else in the kingdom. Huge guy. And when he was a very humble guy until he became king, and something happened. You know, some people make great servants, but when they become the boss, something happens to them. You've all seen that on job sites. You know, you give them a little authority and you give them an inch and they think they're a ruler. Oh, yeah. Well, that's what happened to Saul. He really went to pot. Started off good, ended up terrible. His daughter started off a wonderful, sweet, loving wife to David, but now she's wife number 7. And David is bringing back the Ark of the Covenant. You can read the story in 2 Samuel chapter 3, 4, and 5. And he's out in the street so excited. He's dancing and praising God. And as the Ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. Isn't that sad? Here's the guy trying to praise God, trying to do what's right, and she saw him jumping and dancing and despised him. You can read the whole story. She later exaggerated and lied about David. Oh, you were out there dancing naked. He said, I had an ephod on. That's what the priests wear. No, I wasn't naked. I'm dancing in the linen ephod. But people, when they want to hate you, will always find a reason. The atheists that write letters and nasty stuff about me, you know, on their website, they can find a reason to hate you if they want one. And that's what happened with Saul's daughter here, Michal. She wanted to hate him. And it says in verse, 23, Therefore Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child unto the day of her death. I can assume that means David stuck her in a room someplace and fed her and gave her clothing and never went and saw her. She never had any children. So she had an attitude problem. Bad attitudes are just hard to fix. Sometimes impossible. I taught school 15 years. I was principal a couple of years, and I've seen some kids, I don't see how to fix that attitude. You can just see it in them. The Bible says stubbornness and rebellion is in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction will drive it from him. And if you don't get it out of him early in life, you may not ever get it out. Many parents have waited too late to get their kid under control. You know, if you discipline them and train them, you train up a child. You don't beat them. You train them to do what's right. By the time they're 3 or 4, you can have them moldable in their spirit where they obey mom and dad. But many parents miss those golden years because they're going to forget all the spankings they got before 3. They're going to forget them all. And then, by then, they understand. Dad says jump. Okay, yes, sir. Mom says jump. Yes, ma'am. You can train and capture that spirit. That's what you want. You don't want to break the spirit. You want to mold it like a wild horse. You got to get them where they control. You can neck rein a horse. Ernie was out on a big rodeo thing today. They have a bunch of horses and stuff, and you just bump the neck with the reins, and the horse knows to move. Here you got a 150-pound man controlling a 1,200-pound horse because he's trained to obey. Okay, so Saul had no daughter. Back to Genesis 16. But Abram said to Sarai, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain of the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? You know, if you're running from God's will, this is a good question to ask. Where am I going to go? Where did I come from? What am I leaving? And where should I go? She said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. She ran out of fear. People do dumb things when they're running out of fear. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress. First words out of his mouth, go home. This sets up an interesting situation here, something we can learn from. God puts authority. Weren't you guys in the military at all? My dad was Marines, World War II, and Vietnam was going hot and heavy when they were drafting. I said, I'll go if you draft me, but I'm not going to volunteer for that. A bunch of politicians running the war from home, so I did not go. But it's extremely important in the military, chain of command. Just obey right now. No questions, just do what the boss says. Private, obey the sergeant. Sergeant, obey the captain. Captain, obey the second lieutenant. First lieutenant, general, 4-star, etc., all the way up the chain. You have to have obedience, period. It's the same. God set it up as a chain of command in families. He did it for our good. The angel said, first thing to her, return to your mistress and submit thyself under her hands. Yeah, but she's me. Just go home. This is the system that God set up. I'll show you. Genesis 3, back when Adam and Eve sinned, Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Part of the curse for Eve was pain in childbearing, and Adam's the boss. Part of the curse for Adam was, you got to work for a living now, bud. And you can read all that in Genesis chapter 3. Anyway, this is the way God set it up. You see it repeated in Ephesians chapter 5. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he's the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their husbands in everything. Now, it's not the husband's job to make her do this. It's her job to submit. It's not submission if you're forcing it on them. That's what they should read this and do it. If they don't want to, there's nothing you can do about it. It's not your job to make them do this. And it also says, husbands, love your wives even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. You might have to work 60 hours a week to make enough money to pay the bills to support your wife. Husbands, love your wife. You're commanded to do that. Okay? You see, it's Colossians chapter 3, similar story. Wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives and be not bitter against them. Children, obey your parents. Fathers, provoke not your children to anger. Servants, obey your masters. Masters, give your servants what is just and equal. Pay them fair. He gave a series of commands in Colossians, and I think it includes everybody. Wives, husbands, children. Notice the order. Wife, you submit. If you do, he will love you. He knew that men are more stubborn and bullheaded and hard to get along with, and if the wife submits, if a husband knows, man, she's going to submit to me, I better make sure I know where I'm going and become the leader I should be. It'll force them to get closer to God. Anyway, that's the sequence. Same thing in 1 Peter. First he talks to the wife. Likewise, wives, be in subjection to your husbands. Verse 5. For after this manner in the old time, the holy women also who trusted in God adorned themselves, being in subjection unto their husbands, even as Sarah obeyed Abraham. It's interesting, the only woman chosen as a model for submission is Sarah. Now think about what Abraham, twice you'll see where Abraham's told her, hey, tell these guys you're my sister, because I think they're going to kill me for you because you're good looking. So she endangered herself to save him. He asked her to do something that I think was kind of dumb. Now, I don't understand that culture completely, but sometimes you just okay, Abraham, you're the boss. Yes, sir, I'll do it. Now, in 1 Samuel, we see sometimes you do not obey your husband. Nabal was a moron, and he did not help David's men who protected his sheep, and his wife Abigail did not obey him because he was asking her to do something wrong. So you don't always just blindly obey. Use your head, but be cautious if you're getting out of that. Anyway, back to chapter 16. Getting out of God's sequence. Chain of command. And the angel of the Lord said, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, and it shall not be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said, behold, thou art with fetus. No, I'm sorry. Child, yeah. It's a child the instant it's conceived. It's not a fetus. It's a human being. And abortion is murder, plain and simple. They say, well, what if it's an unwanted child? Well, there's a lot of kids that are unwanted. My parents moved 4 times when I was growing up, but I found them every time. So, doesn't mean you should kill them. I mean, hello. Why is it always the baby gets aborted? Why don't we have a lottery and abort the mother or the father once in a while? You know, give the kid a sporting chance. Get a jar with marbles in there, one for baby, one for father, one for mother, and a couple for doctor, and maybe a couple for, you know, Bill Clinton and Obama, and let's draw a marble and see who dies. Come on, give the kid a chance at least, you know, have a lottery. The kid doesn't, the only one who can't talk doesn't get a vote in this. Okay, anyway, thou art with child and shall bear a son and call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. He will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against his. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Interesting. Ishmael is going to be a wild man. You know, they breed animals for meanness sometimes, or for gentleness. There seems to be a genetic component to temperament. Some people are just naturally friendly, and some are just naturally mean. How many know what I'm talking about? You met some of them, okay? He's going to be a wild man. Apparently God knew Abram and Hagar, their genetics, if they ever get together, this is not good. You know, they crossbreed dogs and horses and cows, and they raise all kinds of animals for not only for better beef, more milk or whatever, but also for temperament. Same with humans. Some people are just naturally mean. Now, when the Lord comes in, he makes you a new person. Let all bitterness and wrath and envy and jealousy and evil speaking be put away from you, the Bible says. We can learn to change our temperament. Now, in Psalm 83, thine enemies make a tumult, and they hate thee. They that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, that would be the Jews, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel be no more. Let's wipe out the Jews. Who's in this group doing this? Ishmaelites. There has been a hatred for 4,000 years now between the children of Ishmael and the children of Isaac, Abram's next son that he had, the legitimate son. Now, if you Google this, it's quite an interesting topic. The Ishmaelites, the descendants of Ishmael, are all blended in with all kinds of other stuff. It's not necessarily all Arab. Muslim is a religion. Arab would be, I guess, a nationality, a heritage, an ethnic background. But these green countries are all claiming to be Muslim. This itty-bitty red one is Israel, smaller than New Hampshire. A little bit bigger than from here to Mobile. I mean, that's the whole country. As wide as Evergreen, Alabama to Monroeville, Alabama. That's how wide it is. I mean, they're that close to people that can't wait to shoot them. Can't wait. Here's a list of Muslim countries that don't allow any Israelis to come in. Iran, Syria, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, United Arab Republic, Libya, etc. There's a real hatred, and most of the Arab nations would probably trace their ancestry back to Ishmael as a general policy. It's not quite a hard and fast, cut and dry thing, but as a general policy, and the Israelites would trace theirs back to Abram's other son, who he had later. So it says he's going to be a wild man, and his hand will be against every man. Just loves to fight. I told you guys about, somebody asked one of the Muslim rulers, where does a Muslim suicide bomber go when he kills himself? And he goes, oh, everywhere. Goes all over. That's cool. Okay. You know, they breed roosters. I was in prison with a guy who, that's what he did for a living. He raised fighting roosters. And they were always looking for the meanest one. They'd save that one out to be the father of the next generation, because there's a mean gene in roosters. Ours all have a dumb gene, something dumb about them, you know. Ours do. They do this with animals. Sometimes animals are raised for fighting, and they look for the meanest one, and they save those. They save that gene code for the next generation. They can also be raised to be gentle, like the foxes. There's an experiment going on for 60 years now in Russia, I think, where they have trained. They've got a whole herd of foxes, or flock, whatever you call them. Google, gaggle, pride, murder. A bunch of foxes that are all tame. They only select for tameness. This experiment's been going on for 60 years. And they look like a dog. They act like a dog. They come when you call them. These are foxes, Russian foxes. Some animals can be bred to be wild, and, you know, the bulls they ride in the rodeo. Others can be trained to be gentle. Let the kid ride them. Apparently, God must have known that if Hagar and Abraham crossed their genes, Ishmael's going to get the mean gene. And that trait's going to be passed on to his children. He shall be a wild man. And if you just watch the news, okay, it is unbelievable. Behead those who insult Islam. He will be a wild man. They can just shoot people and then go eat lunch and like nothing ever happened. They're torturing and slaughtering Christians by the thousands now in some of these Middle Eastern countries. He will be a wild man. Slay those who insult Islam. Butcher those who mock Islam. Europe, you will pay. Your extermination is on its way. A wild man. Let's see, what do they have in common? Somebody did this cartoon. ISIS, Hamas, Boko Haram, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and Taliban. What do they all have in common? They're all the religion of peace. Right? And she called the name of the Lord that spake to her, Thou God seest me. And so they called the name of the well, Bira Lo Hey, whatever it is, which means thou God seest me. So that's how most of these places over there get their name, from something that happened, an event that happened. So, and Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, which Hagar bore, Ishmael. And Abram was 86 old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. 86. Now he was 100 when Isaac was born, the promised seed. We sometimes try to do God's will in our own strength and don't wait for God to just do it when He's ready. He can do much better in a much shorter time than you can do with all your effort. I am so chomping at the bit to get Dinosaur Adventureland up and running and open and kids groups coming, and God's just hasn't supplied yet. I want patience, but I want it right now, so that's been my problem. So it's going to be cool, but I have to just wait on the Lord. Abram should have just waited. 14 more years later, Sarah couldn't be a mother and he couldn't be a father. And God says, okay, now I'll show you what I can do. And apparently he fixed all the plumbing because they had a whole bunch of kids. Abraham had a whole bunch of kids after that. This is the end of chapter 16. A couple of quick lessons there. How did the world get into this mess? Well, Abram didn't simply wait on God. We can jump ahead of God's will, get out of God's will. Sometimes you go right to God's will and keep right on going, right on through it, like Abraham did. He should not have gone to Egypt. If God has led you someplace or led you to somebody, be very careful before you leave. Say, God, guide me. Please guide me, Father. You can make a royal mess out of your life with a simple decision, especially if it's motivated by fear. Don't do that. Learn a simple lesson from Genesis 16. It's only 16 verses in the chapter. Reread it and think about it. Look in the mirror and say, is this me? God, talk to me. The way God talks to you, when He talks to me anyway, is through His Word. I read the book and say, okay, that's what you want. I was a new Christian, 16 years old, reading my Bible. It says a man should not have long hair. Oh, okay, so I went and got a haircut. Been doing it ever since, about the same. I just read the book and find out what it says and do it. It's really that simple. Men, you better submit to the Lord. And wives, you should submit to your husbands. And children, submit to your parents. Unless it's something illegal, you better really have a good reason if you're going to get out of that chain of command. God made it real clear.